Hello, everyone. My name's Elmira Bayrasli. I am the author of the Interrupter Substack, and I am thrilled to be joined by Frida Ghitis, who I have followed for such a long time. She is a foreign policy analyst who has written for a long time for Get, and now is a senior columnist for World Politics Review. And I had reached out to her. This is actually my first Substack Live. And I reached out to her on the off chance that she would want to chat about what has been happening in Venezuela. It, what prompted me was she posted a super interesting post yesterday in the hours after the Trump administration apprehended Maduro and extradited him to the United States. Um, and in it, she wrote that the dictator is gone, but that the dictatorship remains. And that really kind of piqued my interest. And so I invited her here, and she kindly has agreed to chat. So we'll chat for probably about 20, 30 minutes. Frida, thank you so much for joining.
It's my pleasure. We'll learn how to do this together.
Great, wonderful. I'm excited. So as I noted, your piece really piqued my interest because I think when I turned on the television yesterday, it was Maduro is gone, the United States has toppled him, and you wrote the dictator is gone, but the dictatorship remains. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I wrote that piece before we had this strange press conference from Trump. We didn't really know quite what the administration had in mind at the time. But the first thing that I thought when I heard that Maduro was gone, and it's actually something I thought about even before he was gone, when it was obvious that Trump wanted Maduro to leave power during all these months of attacks on what he called it the drug boats, all this pressure he was putting on Venezuela. That to me very very obviously was an effort to get Maduro out of power and not about drugs. When Maduro was withdrawn, was removed from power, detained and plucked out of the country, uh, it was very clear to me that the regime was still in place. This is not what we've had in Venezuela is not a regime like so many other regimes that we see around the world, dictatorships where there is one person and you do this decapitating strike and everything changes. This is a well entrenched regime. It has been there for more than a quarter of a century. It started with Hugo Chavez, and after he died, it's his acolytes, the people who were closest to him, and then the people who were closest to Nicolas Maduro. But it's not just him, and we see that already so clearly. The regime has its tentacles in all the levers of power, and Maduro is gone. Not very much has changed until now, and judging by what Trump said in that press conference after I wrote the article, the United States is not particularly interested in bringing in the democratic opposition. So what we have right now is a great deal of uncertainty. The person who is leading the government is the handpicked successor of Nicolas Maduro, Delcy Rodriguez, and she is someone. She's not a figurehead. She's somebody who has already had a lot of power even before while Maduro was in office. She has a lot of experience. She has run other ministries before, and there are other important figures that need to be watched very, very closely. Diosdado Cabello, who right now is the Interior Minister, he's going to be a very important player to watch. Padrino, the defense minister. So the regime is very much in place, even if Maduro is in a prison in Brooklyn.
So I want to get to all of those figures that you just laid out, but my immediate question is, if the regime is still in place, um, uh, what struck me is before, as the Trump administration was deploying a lot of military ships to the Caribbean, and there was this huge military buildup, there was this sense, I mean, they really wanted to push Nicolas Maduro out. And I read a lot of pieces that talked about how that would be very difficult because Venezuela, there's been a lot of comparisons to Panama about how the United States toppled Manuel Noriega on January 3rd, 1989. But Panama was a smaller country, had a smaller military. Venezuela is a huge country. And so I think the how fairly smooth this operation went. People have been talking about possibly someone close to Maduro or someone in the military might have been collaborating with the Americans. What is your perspective?
I don't think that's inconceivable. I think that's very possible. Maduro, this regime is really despised by the majority of the people in Venezuela. And let's be really, really clear about this. This was a really terrible regime, and Venezuela, the Venezuelan people yearn to be rid of it. And there is a reason why people were celebrating when they heard that Maduro had been detained. So we need to be clear about that. But it's very different from Panama, which you mentioned. With Noriega, it was really a one-man thing more than anything. And the moment the United States pushed him out of power, they installed the democratically elected leader of Panama, the people the man who was chosen and respected by the population. They're not doing that in Venezuela by any, and there's no sign that that's what they want to do. In fact, there's a very strong sign that they do not want to do that. Trump was shockingly dismissive, almost insulting of Maria Corina Machado, the woman who led the opposition, who would have become president of Venezuela if she hadn't been barred from running by the regime. She was chosen in the opposition primaries. She won by a landslide by more than 90%. The opposition primaries, and because Maduro didn't let her run, the second person who was chosen, who is now Eduardo Gonzalez, who's now in Spain in exile, he won probably by at least 70%. So it's really, really shocking to see Trump dismiss the opposition. It's unbelievable. As shocking as the news were when we first got up yesterday morning and heard that the American forces had captured Maduro. As shocking as that was, I think it was even more shocking to hear the things that Trump said during his press conference, to hear him dismiss Corina Machado, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, that way, and to say that the United States is going to run the country. It was really astonishing.
No, I have to say, I mean, as soon as he started talking, someone asked about whether he knows where Machado is, and he said no, and then he called her a very nice woman, but that she doesn't have the support. At least I interpreted that to mean that Machado doesn't have the support with the people who are loyal to the Maduro regime. And so I think that, at least for me, signaled that the Trump administration really does just they plan to actually keep as much of the government intact as possible. So this isn't actually regime change.
Right. And, you could be generous in your interpretation and say, the Trump administration is being very clever. They don't want to do what the Bush administration did in Iraq and do this de-Ba'athification. And, but a generous interpretation would miss the fact that Trump is really alienating at least 70% of the population of Venezuela by doing this. I think a realpolitik approach, a realistic effort that's not let's say polluted by idealism, would have said, okay, we are going to try to have some form of reconciliation. We're not going to just push away the people who trampled human rights. We're not going to push away anyone who had something to do with the horrors of this regime. We're going to try to bring everybody together and include the opposition. I mean, right now they are excluding, 3/4 of the country, the people who have fought to have democracy back. It's really offensive the way they're handling this for now. We don't know. This is day 2. We don't know where this is going, but obviously they're not trying to push out the entire regime, at least for now. This statement that the United States is going to run Venezuela for now is bizarre. They're not running Venezuela. I don't know if that was just Trump being extemporaneous, improvising during the press conference. I thought Secretary of State Marco Rubio looked a little bit uncomfortable yesterday during that press conference. Pete Hegseth looked like Pete Hegseth. He was very excited about all this display of power. and very honored to be standing next to the commander in chief. Rubio looked a little bit uncomfortable, and I think to a large degree this is Rubio's operation. I think Marco Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants, has dreamed his whole life of helping to bring an end to these communist regimes in Latin America. And in fact, uh, I would bet that he is thinking about Cuba in everything he does about Venezuela. Venezuela has been a lifeline to the Cuban regime, and if Venezuela falls, which I think it will. I think eventually what we will have in Venezuela is a pro-American regime. It's terrible news for Cuba, and I think Rubio wants that. But right now the United States is not running. Is not running Venezuela, and right now I don't think we know who is doing it.
So I want to pick up on that because I actually think we could probably do a Substack live on Marco Rubio. With you, I think he feels uncomfortable about everything, but he got himself into this situation. And you posted something on Substack that I also caught my eye. You said that it wasn't exclusively about the oil or about the drugs, because one of the things that Donald Trump was saying about why he was having a military buildup in the Caribbean was to get the narco terrorists. So if this isn't about the oil, and if it's not about the narco terrorists, it is actually about kind of Marco Rubio and his big white whale of getting rid of the communist regime, possibly in Venezuela, but also in Havana.
Well, let's take it one piece at a time. First of all, this claim that this is about drugs is really, really ridiculous, and it has been all along. And it made the killing of these people in the boats even more outrageous. Venezuela is not a major player in drug trafficking. It is not. It is certainly not a major player in drug trafficking into the United States. Venezuelan drugs have gone to Europe mostly, and it has been cocaine, not coming to the United States. When Trump talks about how Venezuelan drugs are killing, I don't know, he has a number. He says, 25,000 people or 20 Americans. The drugs that are killing Americans right now, the drug is fentanyl, and that does not come from Venezuela. So it's been very, and one more point of evidence for why this is not about drugs. At the same time that Trump is pretending to be this big warrior against drug trafficking, he pardoned the Honduran former president who had been convicted in a U.S. court of law with overwhelming evidence of trafficking, of being involved in drug trafficking to the tune of 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. So Trump's claim that this is about drugs is very easy to dismiss. So the next thing we hear is that this is about oil, and we hear that from Trump's critics. It's not hard to see that Trump is very interested in the oil, and if he were doing this with a little more delicacy, he would really not talk about oil quite so much. I remember in the days of the war in Iraq, all the protesters were saying no blood for oil. That was a big chant. In this case, I think Trump is interested in the oil. I think Rubio, who I would guess had a big piece of convincing Trump to go forward with this, told him, there's all this oil, and of course the oil companies are very happy to hear that they will hopefully be able to go back into Venezuela. But Venezuela right now is producing, even though it has the largest oil reserves of any country in the world, even more than Saudi Arabia. Right now, it is a minor oil producer, and its oil industry is in shambles. It's completely dilapidated. I remember in the early days of Hugo Chavez, when Venezuela still had a lot of oil, it was and it used it as a weapon, as a diplomatic tool. It politicized the oil industry to the point where the experts were not running the main oil company PDVSA, and he started installing his cronies to run it. And then when the country started having economic troubles, they started pulling so much money out of the oil industry that it started to fall in disrepair. So between economic sanctions and mismanagement, the Venezuelan oil industry is a disaster. And the global oil industry right now, there's an oil glut. The world does not need more oil at this moment. It's going to take many, many years for Venezuelan oil production to get back to about 4 times what it is right now to really be an important player. And even more, one angle that I think is very interesting is that if Venezuela starts producing a lot of oil prices are going to collapse. And you know what happens when oil prices collapse? American fracking becomes unviable. It becomes taking oil from by fracking is very expensive. If oil is very cheap, it's not worth it. So a very big push to boost the Venezuelan oil industry could actually backfire badly on American oil producers, ironically. So it's not about drugs. Definitely, oil is a factor, but it's not the primary factor. In my view, this is a geopolitical move. It's Marco Rubio wanting to to suck the air out of communist, left wing, hardline leftist governments in Latin America. Trump wanting to show his toughness, and it's about blocking out China, Russia, and Iran, which have been the allies of Venezuela. That's a really important geopolitical piece of this. China, Russia, and Iran are Venezuela's partners here, and so this is it's actually a positive in that sense. It's a positive for U.S. Foreign policy in that sense, except for the fact that it uh, reaffirms this concept of spheres of influence that could be really, really damaging for global stability, for global freedom. This notion that the United States is in charge of this hemisphere, Russia is in charge of Eurasia, and China is in charge of East Asia. That's very troubling, and it opens the door to all kinds of things. Just like going into Venezuela and capturing a president who has been convicted in an American court opens the door for other countries to say we can do the same thing.
Well, I mean, it also I think the other thing that I've seen is not only what you talked about, kind of these regional spheres of influence, but it also opens the door for China to possibly then seize Taiwan. We've already seen Russia, illegally occupy Crimea in Ukraine and really kind of pushing Ukraine to give up territory on its eastern border. But there's also talk about when Trump was inaugurated last January, he talked about, possibly seizing Greenland, the Panama Canal. I mean, even saying it sounds bananas. But I think everything is within the realm of possibilities.
We really are in uncharted waters. And, somebody reminded me that back in 2019, Fiona Hill, the Russia expert at the National Security Council, testified in Congress that the Russians had made a proposal to the Trump administration that the United States take Venezuela, and in exchange the United States allow Russia to go into Ukraine. So these games of the great powers trying to play to toy with the world. That's a dangerous setup, and it's a throwback to the 19th century imperialism, imperial games where a few big powers just divided the world amongst themselves, and it's a different world now. And I saw a Canadian politician thinker recently say it's time for the middle powers to join together to get together to protect themselves if this is the path we're going in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting what happens at the UN over the next. And it was also interesting. I mean, even though this definitely legitimizes Putin's invasion of Ukraine, it was interesting that the Russians condemned Trump's actions.
Yeah, well, I mean, the hypocrisy is beyond belief. But I don't think this legitimizes the Putin's actions in Ukraine. He wishes that Russia is trying to take Ukraine for itself, and it's saying that Ukraine basically doesn't exist, that it's a part of Russia. So that goes a little bit further, and and Russia is killing a lot of people. No, by the way, we haven't heard any firm figures on casualties in this episode. There are reports that about 40 people were killed, 40 Venezuelans were killed. And it's a little bit, it's perhaps understandable, but a little bit uncomfortable that people say nobody was killed, and that's just not true. No Americans were killed, and that's really important. But it's not the full picture. It's not the whole story.
So, I wanted to ask about the Venezuelan military. You noted that they're kind of they are one of the main key power brokers to how Maduro was able to stay in power. Um, are they? Is there any evidence that they're to abandon the regime, or collaborate with the Trump administration? What perspective?
No, there's no evidence that I have seen. And if they're doing it for now, we are not, they're not making themselves known to the rest of the world. I don't think that's beyond the realm of the possible, especially because they have known that something was coming. We all saw, this armada, these, you know, thousands upon thousands of American military forces, and all these ships and warplanes, so lining up around Venezuela. So we knew that something was coming, and the reality of this is that the people who are close to the regime, the military, they have done really well. And that's why the regime has been able to survive. And they want to continue to do well. They eventually they want to align themselves with the winners here. And I think the odds are that the United States is going to be the winner. I think when this is all over, of course there are oft terrible scenarios. We could end up with some kind of a guerrilla war. We could end up with internal clashes. We could end up with a big American occupation force. There are many scenarios that could materialize. But I think the most likely outcome right now is that eventually the United States will install some kind of a Venezuelan figure that will be very pliable, that will make the Venezuela a pro-American country. Something like that happened in Panama, but again, in Panama, the United States immediately allowed the swearing in of somebody who had a democratic legitimacy in Panama after taking Noriega. That is not happening here. And I'll tell you, if the United States had gone in and seized Maduro, there would have been, and seized Maduro, taken him out, and immediately backed the opposition, the man who won the election last year, the year before last, I said, and said we're going to support a democratic, legitimate government for Venezuela for the sake of the Venezuelan people. I think it would still have been an incredibly controversial move. It would still be the target of a lot of criticism. But the way they're doing it now, it just magnifies the negatives of this, to say, and it hurts the image of the United States. I mean, it looks like an imperialist power. What is this talk that we're going to take our oil? It's not America's oil. It's Venezuela's oil. There's some dispute about oil industry assets that were seized by the Venezuelan government, but it's not America's oil. It's not the United States' oil. So, all this talk about oil, all this talk that we're going to run the place, this just makes it so much worse.
Yeah, I mean, another place where the United States just overthrew a government, and installed someone who was pro-American was in Iran in 1953. And I think, we see, 2 decades later, the result is the Iranian Revolution that we saw in 1979. And I think that I, I would imagine that this is just the start of something longer term with the Venezuelans. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, I know Venezuelans were not fond of either Hugo Chavez or Nicolas Maduro, and they're probably happy he's gone. But how do you think Venezuelans will perceive the Americans coming in?
I don't think they will like it. No country likes to see foreign forces on their soil. And I saw that. I was in Kuwait when American forces were aligning, preparing to go into Iraq, and the Kuwaitis absolutely loved Americans. The United States saved Kuwait from Iraq after when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and I saw how the Kuwaiti people started little by little resenting these American soldiers on their soil, telling them, to make way for their convoys of Humvees. Little by nobody likes that, and there couldn't have been a more welcoming country than Kuwait for American forces. That will, Venezuelans will be happy to see the old regime thrown out. They will be happy to see their economy. That the regime has destroyed that country. Their economy has contracted by almost three quarters. I mean, that may just be the worst economic collapse in the history of the world. So there will be perhaps initially some goodwill, but that will go away very, very quickly.
So, kind of as we're winding down our discussion, I mean, I probably could talk to you for the next 2 hours. But what are the kind of biggest risks? What are the biggest risks over the next, like, say, 2 weeks, 30 days?
Well, we need to see what the security forces in Venezuela do. There's the military, the National Guard, and there are these groups called the colectivos, they remind me of the Basij militias in Iran. These civilian forces that are kind of the heavy-handed enforcers who keep the population at bay. They're the ones who, crackheads and demonstrations. So we have to see if they start showing up in the streets. We have to see what the soldiers start doing, what the military starts doing. At some point, governance is going to become more visible. Life has to return to some semblance of normalcy. People have been indoors. There hasn't been a lot of activity, but that can't last forever. The governance is picking up the garbage. People going to school, buses running. At some point, that is going to start becoming part of daily life, and decisions are going to have to be made, and we will see who's really running the country. For now, it's the old regime. It's the Chavista regime, the socialist regime, the one that is backed by Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba. They are still there. What is the United States going to do about it? And Trump is threatening to do something to them if they don't give in. But it's not just one person. Trump is threatening the vice president who is now in charge. But it's more people. We need to keep a close eye on two other figures: Diosdado Cabello, the interior minister, and Padrino, the defense minister. That there are these three people that we have to watch and see if there's some kind of a deal made with them. So far, they don't sound like they want to make a deal.
So do you think that there would be a power struggle between the three of them?
Well, there could be a power struggle if the vice president agrees to go along with Trump. Then they could line up against her, and if the Venezuelan military rejects a deal that she makes, then there could be a bloody power struggle. But we'll have to see. It's hard to imagine that they will go along with the deal because they've also been indicted in the United States. They have so much to lose. It's hard to imagine that they would be offered a pardon, which might be what persuades them to step down. But that's hard to see. They have done really terrible things in Venezuela. So it's all yet to be seen. This could go in any direction right now. Hopefully, for the sake of the people of Venezuela, this has already been done. It's the United States already intervened. Given that the United States already did that, we should all hope, and I certainly hope that there's peace, stability, and democracy in Venezuela, so that people can have a better life. They have suffered for a very, very long time.
Well, certainly, Donald Trump, fancies himself as the peace president, and it doesn't seem that he has actually fully embraced that. But Frida, thank you so much for joining, and I hope that we can have another one of these discussions as this situation develops. This is certainly enlightening to me, and I really appreciate your insights. And I'm also a big fangirl, so I'm so
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. No, this was fun. We should do it again.
Okay. Thanks for
All right.
all joined.
Bye, everyone.